Ever wonder what happens when you give a hyper-ambitious teenager with daddy issues unlimited money and a Twitter account? Well, today we're about to find out. Welcome back to my completely unauthorized psychological breakdown series, where I pretend to understand human behavior despite having the professional credentials of a soggy fortune cookie. Today, we're diving headfirst into the absolutely fascinating train wreck that is Elon Musk's personality. Before we start this completely unqualified psychological evaluation, smash that like button if you've ever wondered what it's like inside the mind of someone who thinks Mars colonization is a reasonable Tuesday afternoon project. And don't forget to subscribe, because apparently my questionable life choices have led me to analyze billionaires for internet points. So we might as well lean into this together. Now, let me paint you a picture of our subject. Elon Reeve Musk was born on June 28, 1971 in Pretoria, South Africa. And right off the bat, we're dealing with someone who grew up during apartheid, which, let's be honest, probably didn't do wonders for developing a healthy relationship with social systems and authority. His father, Elon Musk, was an electromechanical engineer who apparently had the parenting style of a particularly distant lighthouse, while his mother, May, was a model and dietitian trying to hold everything together. Picture this: young Elon, probably looking like a blonde scarecrow with the social skills of a particularly awkward robot, getting bullied so severely at school that he once ended up hospitalized. We're talking about a kid who was reading encyclopedias for fun and building his own computer games at age 12. That's not normal childhood behavior, folks. That's the origin story of someone who's either going to cure cancer or accidentally destroy the world while trying to make better Wi-Fi. So you might be wondering, what exactly makes Elon tick? Well, buckle up, because we're about to dissect a personality so complex it makes quantum physics look like a children's colouring book. Let's start with the most obvious trait: grandiose narcissism. And I don't mean your garden variety, I look good in selfies narcissism. We're talking about the industrial strength, I will single-handedly save humanity variety. This is a man who genuinely believes he's Tony Stark. If Tony Stark had the emotional regulation skills of a caffeinated toddler and the social media impulse control of a drunk teenager. The grandiosity is off the charts. We're dealing with someone who doesn't just want to make electric cars. He wants to revolutionize transportation. He doesn't just want to explore space. He wants to make humans a multi-planetary species. He doesn't just want to improve internet access. He wants to put thousands of satellites in orbit. It's like watching someone play Sim City with unlimited cheat codes and the attention span of a goldfish on espresso. But here's where it gets psychologically interesting. This isn't just run-of-the-mill megalomania. There's a pattern here that screams what we call compensatory narcissism. Remember that bullied kid from South Africa? Well, he never really left the building. The grandiose projects, the need for constant validation, the way he responds to criticism like a wounded animal. It all points to someone desperately trying to prove their worth to a world that once rejected them. You might think, but surely success has mellowed him out, right? Oh, sweet summer child. Success didn't cure Elon's psychological quirks, it gave them a bigger stage and unlimited funding. It's like giving a pyromaniac their own fireworks factory and then acting surprised when things get explosive. Let's talk about his relationship with attention, because this is where things get really fascinating from a psychological standpoint. Musk displays what we might call attention-seeking with a savior complex twist. He doesn't just want to be noticed, he wants to be needed. He wants to be humanity's crucial missing piece. Take the whole Thai cave rescue situation. Here's a genuine humanitarian crisis. And what does our boy Elon do? He shows up with a mini-submarine that nobody asked for, designed by his team in about 5 minutes, looking like something a child would draw if you asked them to design an underwater shopping cart. When the actual cave rescue expert politely suggests this isn't helpful, Musk's response is to publicly call the guy a pedophile on Twitter. That's not normal human behavior, folks. That's the reaction of someone whose ego is so fragile it could shatter if you looked at it wrong. Speaking of Twitter, or X, or whatever he's calling it this week, let's discuss his relationship with social media. This platform has become essentially Musk's public therapy session, except instead of working through his issues privately with a qualified professional, he's processing his psychological needs in real time for 350 million followers. It's like watching someone have a midlife crisis in Times Square while wearing a megaphone and a sign that says, "Please validate me." His Twitter usage patterns reveal something fascinating about his psychological makeup. The man tweets like someone who discovered the internet yesterday, but somehow accumulated decades of unprocessed emotions that need immediate digital release. We're talking 3 a.m. posts about cryptocurrency that read like they are written by someone who just discovered both Red Bull and existential philosophy in the same evening. And the memes. Oh, the memes. Here's a 50-something billionaire posting memes with the enthusiasm of a college freshman who just discovered Reddit. It's endearing in a way, but also psychologically telling. There's something almost desperately human about watching one of the world's most powerful people trying to connect through internet humor. It's like watching your dad try to be cool at a house party, except your dad happens to own several space companies. Now, let's examine his work patterns, because this is where we see some genuinely concerning psychological indicators. Musk reportedly works 80 to 100 hours per week, sleeps at his factories, and has admitted to taking Ambien to manage stress-induced insomnia. This isn't dedication, folks. This is what psychologists call workaholic behavior with possible anxiety and control issues. The man approaches work like someone who believes that if he stops moving for more than 30 seconds, the entire universe will collapse. That's not healthy ambition, that's psychological compulsion. It suggests someone who has deeply internalized the belief that their worth is entirely tied to their productivity. Rest isn't just uncomfortable for him, it's existentially threatening. You might ask yourself, is this just what it takes to be successful? And here's where I have to gently suggest that maybe, just maybe, constantly operating in crisis mode isn't actually optimal human functioning. It's like trying to run a marathon at sprint speed while juggling flaming torches and solving calculus problems. Impressive? Sure. Sustainable? Absolutely not. Let's talk about his relationships, because this is where the psychological picture gets really interesting. Musk has been married 3 times, twice to the same woman, which already sounds like the setup to a psychology textbook case study on attachment issues. His relationship patterns suggest what we might call idealization followed by devaluation, a classic pattern in certain personality presentations. He seems to approach relationships the same way he approaches engineering problems, with intense focus and the assumption that enough effort and resources can solve any issue. When relationships don't respond to the same logic as rocket design, things get complicated fast. It's like trying to debug human emotions using computer programming logic. Spoiler alert, humans don't run on code, and feelings don't have user manuals. His public comments about relationships often reveal someone who intellectually understands human connection, but struggles with its messier, more emotional aspects. He once described his ideal partner as someone who would challenge him intellectually, which sounds reasonable until you realize he's basically looking for a human debugging system for his own psychological processes. Now, somebody recently asked me if Musk might be on the autism spectrum, and honestly, there are some interesting indicators worth discussing. His intense focus on specific interests, his apparent difficulty with social nuances, his direct communication style that sometimes comes across as blunt or insensitive, these could all be consistent with high-functioning autism or Asperger's syndrome. But here's the thing about armchair diagnosis. It's about as reliable as weather prediction in a hurricane. What we can observe are patterns of behavior that suggest someone who processes social and emotional information differently than neurotypical individuals, whether that's autism, social anxiety, or just the natural result of being really, really smart in a world designed for average intelligence. I honestly can't say. What I can say is that his apparent social challenges seem to create a feedback loop with his other psychological traits. Social difficulties lead to isolation. Isolation reinforces the need for validation through achievement. Achievement brings attention that feels simultaneously satisfying and overwhelming, and the cycle continues. Let's examine his relationship with risk, because this reveals something fascinating about his psychological makeup. Most people have what psychologists call loss aversion, meaning they're naturally more motivated to avoid losses than to achieve gains. Musk appears to have the opposite wiring. He's constantly betting everything on the next big project, often to the point where rational observers are genuinely concerned about his financial and personal well-being. This isn't just confidence, it's what we might call pathological optimism combined with grandiose risk tolerance. Normal people see potential failure and pump the brakes. Musk sees potential failure and apparently thinks, "Hold my rocket fuel, I'm going in." The SpaceX story is a perfect example. The man took his PayPal money and decided to start a private space company, despite having zero experience in aerospace engineering. The first 3 rockets exploded. A normal person would maybe reconsider their career choices. Musk's response was essentially, "Fascinating. Let's try that again, but bigger." That's not normal psychological processing of failure, my friend. This brings us to what might be his most psychologically interesting trait, his apparent inability to accept that some problems might not be solvable through sheer force of will and engineering brilliance. Traffic bothering you? Build underground tunnels. Transportation too slow? Design a hyperloop. Social media not quite right? Buy Twitter and reinvent it from scratch. It's like watching someone try to solve every problem with the same hammer, except the hammer costs billions of dollars and occasionally explodes. From a psychological perspective, this suggests someone who has developed what we might call technological omnipotence fantasy. The belief that any human problem can be solved through sufficient application of technology and resources. It's endearing in a way, but also reveals someone who might struggle with accepting the limitations of human control over complex systems. Now let's talk about his leadership style, because this is where we see some fascinating psychological dynamics at play. Musk appears to lead through what psychologists might call charismatic authority combined with micromanagement anxiety. He inspires people with grand visions while simultaneously needing to control minute details of execution. Former employees describe working environments that sound like being inside the mind of someone with severe ADHD and perfectionist tendencies. Everything is urgent, everything is crucial, and everything needs to happen yesterday. That's not just demanding leadership, that's psychological projection of internal anxiety onto entire organizations. The man reportedly sends emails at 3 a.m, expecting immediate responses, and has been known to fire people for disagreeing with him in meetings. This suggests someone who experiences dissent as a personal threat rather than a natural part of collaborative problem solving. It's like he's conducting an orchestra where every musician must play exactly the notes he's thinking, in real time, without sheet music. But here's where it gets psychologically complex. This dysfunctional leadership style somehow produces genuinely innovative results. Tesla did revolutionize electric vehicles. SpaceX did make rocket reusability commercially viable. Sometimes psychological dysfunction and creative breakthrough are uncomfortably intertwined, which makes analyzing someone like Musk both fascinating and ethically complicated. You might be wondering about the role of childhood trauma in shaping his personality, and honestly, the signs are pretty clear. Severe bullying, an emotionally distant father, growing up in a socially and politically turbulent environment, These are all factors that can contribute to developing what psychologists call compensatory grandiosity with attachment difficulties. The pattern suggests someone who learned early that emotional safety came through achievement and control rather than through secure relationships. When your childhood teaches you that vulnerability leads to pain, you might naturally develop psychological strategies that prioritize power and achievement over emotional connection. His apparent need to be the smartest person in every room, his difficulty accepting criticism, his tendency to respond to challenges with aggressive counterattacks. These all point to someone whose sense of self was fundamentally shaped by early experiences of powerlessness and social rejection. Let's examine his public persona versus his private psychological reality. Publicly, Musk presents as confident, visionary, and slightly quirky. But the behavioral patterns suggest someone who is actually deeply anxious, hypersensitive to criticism, and constantly seeking validation through external achievement. It's like watching someone wear a superhero costume to hide the fact that they're fundamentally terrified of not being good enough. The grandiose projects aren't just about changing the world. They're about proving to that bullied kid from Pretoria that he matters, that he has value, that he can't be ignored or dismissed. This psychological split between public confidence and private insecurity shows up in his communication patterns. He'll make bold claims about timelines and capabilities, then quietly adjust expectations when reality doesn't cooperate. It's not intentional deception. It's more like someone whose internal optimism bias is so strong that they genuinely believe their most ambitious projections are realistic. His relationship with failure is particularly revealing. When projects don't work out as planned, he tends to either double down with more resources or pivot to entirely new projects, rather than processing what went wrong. That's not learning from failure. That's avoiding the psychological discomfort that comes with accepting limitations. Now, let's talk about his apparent obsession with existential risks and humanity's future. On the surface, this seems admirably altruistic, but based on how the mind works, it might also represent what we call grandiose rescue fantasy. The unconscious belief that you are uniquely responsible for solving everyone else's problems. His concerns about artificial intelligence, climate change, and planetary survival aren't wrong, but his psychological relationship to these issues seems to cast him as humanity's essential savior. That's not just concern for the future, that's a psychological need to be indispensable on a species level. It's like having a savior complex, but instead of wanting to rescue individuals, you want to rescue all of human civilization. The scale is impressive, but the underlying psychological dynamic might be surprisingly similar to more mundane forms of codependency. This brings us to his relationship with money and wealth. Musk has repeatedly claimed that accumulating wealth isn't his primary motivation, and honestly, his behavior supports this. He's constantly reinvesting everything into new projects, often to the point of personal financial risk. But here's the psychologically interesting part. His relationship with money seems to be entirely instrumental. Money is just fuel for bigger projects, not an end goal. That suggests someone whose psychological reward system is wired around achievement and impact rather than material accumulation. It's almost like he has a psychological allergy to traditional markers of success. This might actually be psychologically healthier than it appears. While his work habits are concerning, his apparent indifference to conventional wealth accumulation suggests someone who has avoided at least some of the psychological traps that often come with extreme success. As we wrap up this completely unauthorized psychological profile, let's consider what we've learned about the mind of Elon Musk. We're looking at someone who appears to be extraordinarily intelligent, but emotionally underdeveloped, grandiose but deeply insecure, innovative but psychologically inflexible. He's simultaneously one of the most influential people on the planet, and someone who seems to be running from childhood wounds that no amount of success can heal. It's like watching someone try to build a rocket ship to escape their own psychology, except the psychology keeps showing up at mission control. His story is both inspiring and cautionary. Yes, his psychological quirks have driven innovations that benefit millions of people, but they've also created personal and professional costs that seem genuinely unsustainable. It's a reminder that psychological health and worldly success don't always align, and that sometimes our greatest strengths and most troubling weaknesses spring from the same psychological source. So, there you have it. One man's completely unqualified analysis of one of the most psychologically complex public figures of our time. Remember, I'm not a licensed psychologist. I just play one on the internet with concerning enthusiasm. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the wonderfully weird world of billionaire psychology, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments who you'd like me to completely misanalyze next. Until then, remember, we're all just trying to figure ourselves out. Some of us just happen to do it with rocket ships and social media meltdowns. Thanks for watching, and remember, if you're going to have psychological issues, at least make them interesting enough for a YouTube video.